Shalom, loved ones. In John 11, we come to a key turning point in the gospel narrative. It's the familiar scene when Jesus raises his friend Lazarus from the dead. In the heart of this story, Jesus utters the words that form really the heart of John's message overall. Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." Do you believe this? If there is one thing we have been taught by medical science, it is the reality that there is a clear dividing line between life and death. The two do not coincide, ever. If something or someone is alive, they are, by definition, not dead. And if something or someone has died, they are, by definition, not alive anymore. This is a bitter pill to swallow because we all know that death touches on something deep within us. It is no mere scientific fact that can be measured with a monitor. It produces a profound psychological pain within us. The cries of our hearts that long never to be parted from our loved ones. Is it any wonder that every major faith tradition, whether Christian or otherwise, offers the hope of life after death in one form or another? In John 11, Jesus promises us this hope and demonstrates his ability to make good on that promise by raising Lazarus from the dead. I'd like to look closely at what Jesus says in verses 25 and 26, because herein lies the heart of the good news that Jesus came to announce. First, Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." I am the life. I am the life. With these words, Jesus establishes his connection with God, who is the giver of all life. Jesus uses the expression "I am" throughout this gospel. And biblical scholars note that this is none other than an application of God's very name, Yahweh, which means "I am," to himself. Throughout John's Gospel, Jesus makes clear that even as he, the Son, is one with the Father, so the life that God gives may be found in him. To know him is to know the Father, and to know the Father is to have life in the giver of life. And this life overcomes all death. All death. That is what Jesus wants us to know. Notice that Jesus says more than "I am the life." He says, "I am the resurrection and the life." He is the one who has the power not only to give life, but also to raise the dead and give them a new life. The word resurrection in Greek is anastasis, and it literally means essenced again. Ana means again, and stasis refers to a being's essence or thisness. It's related to the word anastemi, which means to stand up again. It is a recovery. Anastasis is a recovery of one's entire self. To make the totality of his promise abundantly clear, Jesus uses a word for life here that is truly all-encompassing. Throughout the New Testament, there are 3 words that are used that can be translated as our single word in English, life. The first is bios, or bios, as we often pronounce it. We get our word biology from this, and it means physical life. The second is the word psyche, and we get our word psychology from this, and it refers to the intangible life force of an individual. It's the breath of life, the elusive part of you that makes you, you. The third word that's translated as life in English is zoe, zoe. We get our word zoo from this, and it encompasses the entire idea of life in its totality, including the ideas of bios and psyche. This is the word that John uses again and again in his gospel, especially when Jesus is talking about his ability to give life because of his connection with God, who is the giver of life. When Jesus says this, he is invoking God's promise to restore us to Zoe, a new life in totality, body and spirit. Notice that Jesus in this text gives us a foretaste of this in the complete re-essencing of Lazarus in the here and now. It's by this foretaste that we can be assured he will keep his promise to grant us life after death when we have passed from time into God's I am eternity. The invitation is just to believe this promise like a child, which is to say, to let ourselves get caught up in the extraordinary, supernatural playfulness of this vision. That is what another key word in today's text signifies. It is the word believe. Jesus says, whoever believes in me will never die. And then he asks the audacious question, do you believe in me? Do you believe this? The word believe involves so much more than mere mental assent. It denotes the idea of full encounter. John uses this word no fewer than 98 times in his gospel. Biblical scholar Grant Osborne observes that the word belief is connected with a wide variety of images in John's gospel, like seeing, knowing deeply, receiving him, coming to him, drinking his living water, and consuming his flesh. To believe is to give oneself over to something or someone. It is to go all in. Lest this seems too demanding, we do well to keep in mind that the reason Jesus calls us to believe is because he himself is the living embodiment of God's giving over of God's entire self to us. In other words, Jesus represents God's all-in commitment to us. In today's text, this total witness of God towards us is signified by Jesus' tears over the death of his friend Lazarus and the sorrow of his loved ones. Everyone could see instantly how deeply Jesus loved him by Jesus' tears. Before we ever believed in God, God demonstrated God's own belief in us by entrusting God's whole self to us, tears and all. And in Jesus, God entrusted God's self to us to the point of death, which, ironically, was brought on by our unbelief. But the gospel says that God's belief is stronger than our unbelief. That's what resurrection proclaims. Despite our incredulity upon hearing Jesus' promise of life after death, God says, "Oh yeah? Just watch me, kids. I'm a believer." The invitation of John's gospel then is to give ourselves over to the wild belief that God has given God's self over to us with such complete totality that life is the inevitable result of nothing more than a child's belief in the utter goodness of it all. Is it any wonder Jesus asks them, "Do you believe this?" The problem I think we sometimes have in responding to Jesus' question is our interpretive exclusivity of his promise. We wonder, but what about all those who don't believe in Jesus specifically? Will they have life too? But Jesus has already answered our question. Life is in the Son because life is in the Father. It's Jesus himself who acknowledges this. He only has what the Father has in the first place. This is why the writer of Hebrews can say that all those who believed in God before the time of Jesus were saved by that belief in God, the giver of all life. And now, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, we may also suppose that God will give life to all those who simply look to God in loving trust and childlike faith. Full stop. And we can be assured that God is still revealing God's self to all in Christ-like fashion because Jesus has shown us God's all in for all people. So you see, the promise that Jesus makes here in John 11 is not exclusive. It's radically inclusive. In any case, we don't need to worry how God goes about gifting life to others. That's really not your concern. It's God's. You only need to tend to the question that Jesus poses to you today personally. Do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life? Do you believe this, my child? Your questions do matter. Don't get me wrong, but right now all I want to know is if you will join me in believing the impossible, that death does not have the last say. Life does. Indeed, I have put this desire and hope in the hearts of all people for a reason. Dearly beloved, in going all in for God's all-in commitment to us, we don't have to worry how God's life re-essences all who believe. We only need to give ourselves over like kids to the renewal and resurrection of it all. The call is to let God reveal God's life through us simply by saying yes to Jesus' question. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Yes. Yes, we do, Jesus. Yes, we believe like children in the impossible. We're all in because you're all in. Amen and amen.